Welcome. My name's Cory Colby. I'm professor of government here at Lone Star College-Tomball, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Pearland ISD school board member Mike Floyd, who made national headlines just a few months ago when he became one of the youngest elected officials in the United States and in Texas by defeating an incumbent to win the seat. And what was especially remarkable about this is he did this at a time that he was also a graduating senior. So with that, welcome Mike Floyd.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I'm glad that you're here, and we're going to, if you don't mind, can I just get you to introduce yourself a little bit and give a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, I'm Mike Floyd, as Professor said. I am from Pearland, Texas, which is just south of Houston. It's about 30 minutes south of Houston's downtown. This past May, we made history, in fact, when we won our campaign for Pearland ISD School Board. As a senior in high school and with a bunch of seniors working my campaign and staffing it, we were able to pull off what was thought to be an upset in the political Houston area political scene. And now that I've had the privilege to serve for about 6 months, I think I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we can get into what I've done, what I've learned, and what I'm hoping to do. I have 5 brothers and sisters. I'm the third, so there's I'm used to a lot of noise, and so that helps me actually in the political world of kind of focusing on what matters and letting go what doesn't. And so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm certainly glad to have you. And I wanted to just real quick, you mentioned that your race was in an upset, an unexpected win, and other incumbents in your race won in a 60-40 margin. But you swung a chunk of the population that had voted for the incumbents in other races to vote for you. What do you think resonated? What was it about you and your campaign that resonated with the voters and caused them to take a chance on this high school senior to entrust the school district to him?
Well, 2 things. I think first, obviously, as a result of the press attention, as a result of all the statewide or really local attention we were getting from local media, it sparked an interest. And so people were excited that I was on TV, that they saw me in the newspaper, and they wanted to hear what I had to say. And so it kind of also informed the general public that, hey, there's an election going on. Because, typically in the Pearland election, specifically for our local elections, we would have 2% turnout. As a result of all of the efforts we put in and the media attention, we turned that up to 10%.
Right.
So we were able to really significantly increase turnout and bring people out. So one factor was a lot of people were interested. It was new. I was taking on the establishment, which a lot of people, typically right now during our political cycle that aren't really resonating with the establishment. The second thing and the most important thing in terms of why that typically consistent establishment voting bloc switched and voted for me was because I believe our campaign brought in their perspectives into the discourse better than the incumbent did.
Right.
By saying that,
makes sense.
You're sending your money, your children into this public system. As a product of that system, as someone who's still in that system, I can show you the waste, the inefficiencies. I can show you where we can make improvements, where we can gain. And that message of having the perspective from inside the classroom, behind the desk, and going to the dais, I think really was a convincing argument that led to that block splitting and deciding. Now, there is also, famously in the local area, my opponent had a scandal the last week of the campaign. He said some offensive things about the Muslim community, trying to get votes, and that didn't work out for him in the general. So. But before that cycle, we were also ahead in terms of the early vote.
Right.
So all of these factors came into play.
Okay. So you were already trending in front of that, and the scandal just was consequential or inconsequential. So let's talk a little bit. You talk about having an inside perspective. What is it that something had to motivate you as a person who was in their senior year to step into public service? So can you give us a little bit of the backstory about What made you decide that this was the thing that you wanted to jump into?
Well, I had a long record of actually getting people together to challenge some of the status quo ever since I was in fourth grade. In fourth grade, we challenged the lunch system. In the eighth grade, we challenged the lunch system again. In the 11th grade, we got 6,000 signatures to change the dress code. And so I had unintentionally politicized some members of my high school class. And it was the senior year of high school. There were a number of events happening. In my junior year, a good friend of mine passed away, and the school district didn't want to memorialize him, which was really inspiring for a lot of other kids and myself to kind of fight for that, but that was just one reason. It was like a death by a thousand cuts. There were so many small issues that just added up to saying, you know what, maybe we need a new change. In my school district, the superintendent is on record saying that transgender kids are pedophiles and polygamists, which is very insulting. I mean, you don't even need to dive into that. If your kid was called a pedophile by the superintendent of a school district, major school district, regardless of who they were, where they come from, or what they believe, you would feel insulted. What was really profound was that not a single school board member spoke out. Not saying that his opinion on transgender kids in terms of the bathroom bill was immoral, because he has a right to believe that what he believes, but the fact that he called out a 5-year-old kid and said that about her was really serious, and the fact that no one stood up against it was even more serious. And
so it wasn't about the values, it was about the conduct, right?
The conduct. I mean, well, not necessarily the values. The values were they're also
right. But your issue was not necessarily that. You weren't making an argument about his values. It was about the presentation of, that's not really his role, right? Is that kind of what I'm understanding there? Is that everybody is entitled to their personal values, but
as a public official in your official capacity, that it was totally inappropriate.
Right. Yeah. And so you get on the board. Kudos to you for that. That was remarkable. I think those of us who are kind of government junkies were watching that, going, "Oh my gosh, what has happened here? We understand what's happening here, but here." So you get on the board, and now you're charged with the responsibility of governing. So now it's the difference between, is this a flash in the pan, or what is he actually going to do? So what is it now that you have accomplished, now that you're 6 months in, and what is it that you're hoping to accomplish going forward?
Well, 6 months in, we've actually, I believe, been able to do a very good job so far. Not just me, but my fellow board members as well. We've worked together. We've recognized our differences and worked together on our similarities to bring some common improvement and progress. In terms of the deficit, we had a $10 million deficit before I took office, and now we were able to, like I said, bring in that student perspective, and we were able to cut that down now to $1 million.
So how do you do that? I'm sorry to kind of redirect that. So what kind of changes did that make? Because I think there's a lot of school districts looking at some deficits, since spending has been cut. How do you close a gap like that? I think you've alluded to that before, but how did you actually do it?
Well, when you look at the budget, and this is going to get really technical, you have line items, and there are certain programs which are intentionally bloated because the districts anticipate maybe certain needs. So, for example, we allocated over $12 million in our school district to school leadership, which basically means principals, counselors, all of the admin in all the schools, so that they can properly manage their campuses. And from looking at it and seeing the inefficiencies that I saw as a student, so every administrator would get a brand new laptop and a tablet, which would never be used. Certain small things like that, which are very costly when they add up across 24 campuses. I was able to say, look, they don't use them. We were able to bring the principals in; they weren't using them, and so we were able to cut that. So it was issues like that where you see that happening, and you bring in and confirm what you thought, and then cutting it. Not necessarily, that sounds bad, cutting it, but making the system more efficient. Stop spending money on things that we don't use. And then you can allocate those funds elsewhere. What's also important to note, though, we didn't make the $9 million cut all from cuts. So
Right.
we also had property value increase that went up at the same time. So it was a mixture of cutting and the value of the district growing that both came together to lead to a $9 million reduction in the deficit. And I think we're forecasted in the next year or so to actually have a surplus for the first time in a very long time.
That's fantastic.
So we're hopeful and we're optimistic.
And you mentioned that you brought the principals in to get their opinion, and I think that was something that is critical in other things I've heard you say, is you didn't just set policy on your own feelings about the thing. So
Right.
can you talk about how you have brought in various groups and weighed input from them? Clearly you had a perspective from being on the inside, but how are you weighing that information from the stakeholders?
I think this is actually a fundamental question for all politicians, is essentially asking ourselves and asking each other, and constituents asking their public servants, what gives you the right? You know, what gives you the right to make this decision? Do you know all the facts? Have you talked to all the people? And I think a significant part of leadership is the self-awareness that you don't have all the answers.
Right.
And so it's incumbent upon you to go out, to find the answers, to reconfirm or reaffirm what you originally thought, or you might be wrong and you may have to rethink your strategy. And so that's what, when I went out to the principals, that's why I did it.
Sure.
As a perspective of someone who has a perspective of a student, I know I don't have the perspective of maybe a 40-year teacher. And so it's important for me to go to that teacher and ask them questions, just as it's important for them to ask me questions. And so that dialogue between different perspectives is essential. I think that's something that our nation needs right now, is to understand that while we all have a lot in common, we all have very different lives. And if we're going to make policy for 336 million people or so, you need to kind of get a consensus, or somewhat, as much as you can. And so leadership comes from the ability to understand that you don't have all the answers, and leading other people into the process so that they can contribute and something beautiful can come from it.
So on a little bit different note, you brought in the experience of a 40-year teacher, and so being a little bit humorous here, did you find a bump in the grades after election there a little bit?
No, of course not. I never saw a bump in the grades. No, I didn't. But I did see relationship changes, obviously, after I was elected, but before I was sworn in, I was still a high school student for a number of days. And students had a blast with it because, I was all of a sudden my principal's boss, or, the boss's boss. And, it was funny because that was the period of final exams, and people were kind of mad about some exams, and so they said, Mike's going to get on this, and you're going to be in trouble. But of course not.
Right.
No, my grades didn't go up, but all of a sudden teachers started to come to me, like the 40-year-old teacher, or 40-year-old teacher, 40 experienced years teacher, or so many others as well, new teachers and APs as well, which I was really surprised by, assistant principals coming to me, and just talk to me about the issues they were facing, and how I, as going to be soon a board member, how I could help them. And so I think that really kind of put everything into perspective. Amidst the media storm that we went through, knowing what this was really about and knowing who I was going to be able to help, once the cameras left, these people. And so I think that really put into perspective for me after that election.
One of the things you said kind of struck me a little bit is, after the media storm came through, you are probably the best known school board member in the state of Texas. So what do you hope that will, thinking about the state of Texas education system, what impact do you think that you can have on that, or what is the state of the Texas education system, and what should we be hoping to change or better about it?
Well, first of all, less than 1% of school board members are under the age of 30. I think there's only one who's under the age of 18, or who was 18.
Who was 18 at the time, yeah.
At the time of the election. So, obviously, I'm a big proponent of young people getting involved.
Sure.
I hope that my election will spur some young people running for office. I think we're seeing that. I've been in contact with a guy running in the Denver ISD school board
wow.
election who reached out to me after I won and said he wanted my help and that he was inspired by our victory and he believed he could do it too. And so I said, absolutely, of course you can. And so young people getting involved is obviously a big part of why I ran and what I'm going to continue to do each and every day in this job. In terms of the state of Texas and how education's here in our state, I can tell you that every board member I've ever met so far, and I've met ones who've been there for decades, people who have just been elected with me, folks who are very proud conservatives and folks who are very proud liberals, everyone is in consensus and agreement that the education system in Texas is something to be worried about.
Right.
Not only have billions of dollars been cut in years past, they've not been added back in their full capacity as they were when they were cut, as you know. The 4-page algorithm that is used to allocate funding, I mean, it's just ridiculous. They use, I mean, talk about a math problem, right, for students. A 4-page problem is something that almost epitomizes the inefficiencies of our state government education system.
Right.
And then, of course, now you have the rising philosophical disagreement that's going on in our state about whether or not every Texan has a right to education, or whether the voucher plan and the private education system being subsidized by public dollars is the way to go. And it's always important to keep in mind what both sides are saying. So, you know, that's something that I try to do as somebody who is on, you know, who has a specific set of opinions. It's always important for me to look at the opinions of others and try and, at least as best I can, see things from their shoes. It may be impossible in the end, but I can at least try as hard as I can. There's two philosophical beliefs in our country, our state right now. One, which is that the education system in Texas needs to be improved. It needs to have more monies. It needs to be revamped and reinvigorated, and it needs to be streamlined and made more efficient. And that it's ultimately a right for every Texan to have access to a quality public education.
Right.
And I believe that most people would agree with that. It's the backbone of our society, education. If we don't have an educated public, I don't know if we'll be able to accomplish much of anything. The other thought is this, and I don't agree with the voucher plan at all. I'm very opposed to it. But they believe that they have a right to spend their money on their children at an institution of their choice, and that they shouldn't have their money being spent at a public school if their kid's not even going to go to it. But the problem is this: if you're sending your kid to a private school already, odds are you have the money to do it. Unless there's, you know, some schools are funded in different ways, maybe through charity or scholarship. But for the most part, if you're sending your kid to St. John's or Kincaid or any of those elite schools, you're paying for it already, and it's expensive.
Right.
Our district spends about $5,000 per student. So $5,000 will get me educated for an entire year. You know, electricity, books, a number of resources that is just unbelievable. Because when we come together, we can do a whole lot more than we can on our own.
Right.
The problem is, though, let's say you wanted to send your kid to private school, or you do send your kid to private school. The voucher plan would give you a $5,000 tax cut, because all of a sudden you can use that $5,000 and put it towards your kid's education, which sounds great on face value. The problem is, though, that $5,000 that would be going to a public school is not going to your kid's education. So you got a $5,000 tax cut. Meanwhile, our schools don't have enough money to put books on the table. We don't have enough money to run the lights anymore. And so you have to really value, what do you value more? Tax breaks for a few or public education for all? And I think that's what really the debate comes down to. And you know, you can tell which side I'm on pretty clearly.
Right. Yeah, and I think that clearly your perspective is that as somebody who's elected to make decisions for the community, you seem to definitely say, you know, the sum is greater than its parts. You know, the $5,000 will get you X, you know, on its own. But when we all put in $5,000, you can do, you know, there's a multiplier factor. And I think that's a good point. And so I want to, I guess, redirect a little bit. What do you think is, I didn't get a chance to ask you this earlier, what do you think is the role of K through 12 right now in prepping students for college? So how should we be doing that?
Well, it really depends on what college is for that individual. And some folks, you know, don't need to go to college. It's something that if they are ready to jump into the workforce, by all means jump in. I think the purpose of K through 12 is to prepare folks to have the basic platform for which they can leap off from later in life, that they can establish a career upon. And obviously now that our world's changing, it's getting more competitive. You know, we have to face global competition from India and China, not to mention our old competition from Western Europe, Canada and Mexico, of course. But mainly Asia now. Asia is really developing very quickly and really technologically surpassing us in some situations. But I think that if you're prepping to go to college, we should be teaching the right way. We shouldn't be teaching to a standardized test that is just a way for a school district to get a numerical grade value. And that may be important for folks moving into the community to know what kind of school district it is. If it's an A+ school district or if it's a D, it may alter your opinion about whether moving in or not. But ultimately, I don't believe that students come in a standardized form and they shouldn't be tested like they do. And so it's really important for us, I think, to kind of refocus on what the goal of public education is, especially K through 12. Is it to put kids into college? If it is, then we've got to change. We've got to focus on doing that. I mean, maybe focus more on writing, because that's really been taken out of a lot of curriculum. I'm sure you've seen that. Right,
absolutely.
Yeah. However, if it is still about making your own free choice after high school, and not there being a focus on post-secondary education, then what we're doing right now is really not the worst thing in the world. For example, if college was to become free across the country and it became a government initiative to send all of our kids through 4 years of college, then the system would change. The K through 12 system would become a primary education system to the post-secondary education system. But if right now, where college is kind of still limited to only a fraction of the population, while still growing significantly, it's still limited to many, many millions of Americans. The K through 12 system has to function as the base foundation for all people. So until we subsidize college education, K through 12 is really all we can do.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make for people when they look at K-12, is that you have a system that's designed to really try to catch people up for whatever direction they're going to go. I am going to shift gears on you a little bit here. So you unfortunately are an outlier for the involvement of young people. And really, and I want to get away from the idea of young people involvement, but we are on a college campus, and so I want to, I do want to mention that. But for people who are not active at all, but especially for young people, you're an outlier. So if there's somebody that is listening to you, how would you say that they should take the first steps to get involved? And most young people say that they feel like they aren't involved because it doesn't matter to them. So how do we move people who aren't engaged into being engaged?
Well, that is a billion-dollar question, literally.
Right.
And that's what both political campaigns spent billions of dollars on.
Absolutely.
Well, Secretary Clinton spent $1 billion. Trump, nowhere near. But I will tell you what I did and how I've gotten involved and have stayed involved. Not only, I did petitions in 4th grade and so on and so forth, but my first real campaign was when I was 14 years old. I jumped into a congressional campaign. I was working as a social media director. And, I really didn't know what I was doing, but soon I proved myself to be of value, and the candidate was really asking me a lot of policy questions. And so kind of interesting that a congressional candidate would ask a 14-year-old what to do. But, to see what I said end up on a congressional candidate's website, and that a part of his platform that he was going to the people with, that was really impressive on myself, that I could do this at this age and have a real impact. When I was 16, I did the same thing. Whenever it was the 2014 elections, when I was 16. And then in 2016, of course, I ran myself. After my father had ran in the 2016 election, I ran in 2017, I'm sorry. But the 2016 election, my father ran, and I was able to manage that campaign myself. with, of course, with him, and we were able to really put our own platform out there, and we were able to do a good job in an election. We didn't win, but we did better than expected. So really, I mean, just the belief that a simple idea to the right person can get out there and become law is very real, especially when you're talking to young people and their potential for involvement with congressional candidates specifically, but also candidates across the board, state representative and state senator. Volunteering on a presidential campaign may be a bit different because you don't have access to the candidate,
Right.
but anywhere where you do, where you can actually sit down with the candidate and talk to them, the potential is just is unbelievable.
And I've heard you say before, and I've told my students anytime that I've come in contact or anytime I've talked to people about civic engagement, one of the things that I mention is that find a person or a cause that you truly believe in, because there's motivating factors in the thing that you're passionate about. And I think it really is that simple. And you have laid that out before, that it doesn't have to be, we kind of think of presidential elections and getting involved in that, but the effect a school board member has on your life is really critical to our communities. And it's something that is uncontested quite a bit. And I know that one of the things you've said before is you got into the race because you saw somebody that you disagreed with didn't have an opponent.
Right.
And I'm paraphrasing, of course, you're telling of that. But so what, I guess, what is the difference here between activism and kind of a civic engagement, if you want to distinguish that out a little bit? Because there are people who are very active, but who are not engaged. And I've heard you talk about something like that.
Well, they're two different things, and they're both very valuable. Activism I see as more of political action, marching, rallying, protesting.
Right.
Very, very valuable to the political process because it gets a message and a point across. But it's not the same thing as engagement.
Right.
Because if you're just protesting all the time, you may get a backlash, actually. So instead of actually creating a dialogue with somebody, for example, I went and spoke with John Cornyn, who's a Texas senator, Republican, and we disagreed on what the Trump appointed a nominee for a court, Jeff Mantier, and I was talking to him about it, and we had a good conversation. Don't know how he's going to vote on it, but I can tell you, my message to him carried out probably a little bit stronger than the folks yelling downstairs in the lobby.
Right.
Both important, though. Both, I would say, equally important, because without the presence of those folks in the lobby, he may have not taken my meeting. Now, in terms of actually getting involved in campaigns, I think that's probably more important than both, because that's how you shape democracy. That's how we have our system here. That's how you shape our future, is actually getting the right people in office. That's how we have, that's a republic, a democratic republic.
Absolutely.
If we were a pure democracy, then you just vote, and one vote would be it. And that's probably as much as you would have to do. But because we are a very complicated, intricate, deliberately slow process, and that's important to remember, deliberately slow.
Which is frustrating at times, but
Very frustrating,
purposeful.
but very purposeful. And I think we should all be very grateful, because we are seeing kind of the ramifications of what would have happened if our founders weren't so wise to put those provisions in place, because you have a Congress right now and a president right now who are moving very fast on certain initiatives and are being stopped, not necessarily by the Democrats, but by the Constitution.
Right.
And I think that the wisdom of that is very brilliant. But getting involved in campaigns and actually writing policy and working as staffers in state representative's office and senator's office and congressman's office, that is probably the more important thing. I think you said it earlier perfectly. Behind every bill, behind every piece of legislation, there are the fingerprints of those we'll never know. The staffers, the 30-year-olds, the 20-year-olds who wrote this legislation, who pushed it through. The senators vote on it.
Right.
But their votes are predetermined most of the time before they go in by conversations with their staffers. So it's the people behind the scenes in every regard, I believe, who do the bulk of the work.
Yeah, and you've mentioned the value of relationships in campaigns, and I think that's a recurring theme in the things that you talk about. And I point out to my students that Washington and Austin are run by people under 30.
Yeah.
and they're the people who have the ear of the elected officials. And so relationships do matter with these individuals. So I've kept you for a while. I want to ask you two last things. One of them you already know is coming at you. But what is, when somebody walks away from you, whether it's in a school board meeting or in a forum like we had earlier or just an encounter on the street, what is it that you hope that that person walks away with after encountering you?
Well, I hope they think of me in a nice way, one. But I think that the larger message that I have been constantly trying to push is to redefine the stereotype of a young person. That we're not always on our phone. That's
Right.
not true. We are on our phone statistically more so than older folks, but we're not. I mean, that's not all we do. We're not always on social media. We're not always, on Snapchat or Instagram. But I hope whenever I talk to people, whenever I talk to you, whenever I talk to constituents in the streets, that they leave with an impression of this guy seems like he knows what he's doing, and that may redefine their opinion of young people. Now, it may not, depending on the results of what I've been trying to do in the city,
Right.
trying to get young people engaged. If it fails, then then they'll think they're right. But the bottom line is that just like they said, women weren't qualified to vote before, because they were, what the comment was back then. Young people, while we may lack experience, we make up for in judgment, and we make up for in energy. And I think that is something that I've really been trying to press forward. That's something that I think I will continue to try to press forward in the future.
An interesting thought. I think that so many people discount the judgment of young people.
Yeah.
So, but I think you're right. My experience has been that there are very large numbers of young people that are able to evaluate really critically and make good decisions. So the last thing, I know the last time I asked you this, it kind of caught you off guard, but what is it that at this point in life you can look at, and the reason this even made its way back in is because I was so impressed with your remarks earlier. So congratulations for answering that on the fly like that. But what is it that at this point in life you can look at and go, in a world where truth seems to be subjective, what is it you know for sure?
Yeah. Well, and I was impressed with the answer I gave too, because typically you have to work through an answer, and then something will come which really epitomizes what you're trying to say.
Right.
And you're right. We live in a modern world right now where the facts aren't being realized by a lot of folks.
Right.
I mean, if the president said that the sky was orange, a good portion of the public would say that the sky was orange. And that's concerning. And it's not just with the president, but also with the Democrats. There's speculation about the Russia investigation, and we don't know if it's true or not. And there's a lot of unconfirmed stuff out there that's being put on social media. You see it all the time. And so there's a lot of things that the American people don't know. It's a very uncertain, tumultuous time.
Right.
But and what I said, which I think is a good answer, thank you, is that what we do know, what we all should know, and I think what is found to be consistent across the political spectrum, is that this country is still worth fighting for. That even though we are in a very weird period of time in our history, we have still got to fight for this country, because we could lose it. We take a lot of rights, a lot of privileges that we have as Americans for granted every day. It's always important to remember, China is a communist society. Iran is in a theocratic dictatorship. Syria is in, complete destruction right now as a result of a terrible war there. Egypt as well, with the Muslim Brotherhood and the corruption there. And so, as Americans, we can get bogged down in who we supported in the election, if we're on Team Red or Team Blue. But we should never lose the sight that this country, our founding values, our institutions, and our rights are worth fighting for. And we should never give up on them, no matter how old you are, or no matter how young you are, whether you're rich or poor, black or white, gay or straight. We should all be fighting for this country. And that doesn't mean that it always has to be the patriotic fight. Sometimes taking a stand or kneeling is actually what's right for the country. And so, that's always important to keep in mind. But yeah, this country, I do know that it's worth fighting for.
That's, and I think that's a great place to. What else can you say after that?
Right.
So, it has been insightful to be able to visit with you today. You have definitely brought some other things to my attention, hopefully to others' attentions. And good luck to you as you continue on. I know that you've got a lot on your plate right now, and you seem to be handling it really well. So good luck, and I appreciate it. Thanks for coming and being a part of this with us.
I appreciate it.
So, thanks a lot.